People sacrificed to achieve freedom and democracy we now enjoy, and how did it become possible? The May 18 Memorial Foundation and MBC Gwangju branch prepared for the May 18 Academy to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the May 18 Democratic Uprising. We'll talk about the May 18 Democratic Uprising with experts around the world, with particular emphasis on the theme of how the May 18 Democratic Uprising contributed to democratization in South Korea. The May 18 Academy, which will inspire you, begins now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to speak to you on human rights in Asia, this particular theme today. And let me begin by thanking the May 18 Memorial Foundation for this invitation. It's my great pleasure. And thanks to the new technology, we are able to interact virtually. Now in this talk today, and I hope we can make this talk interactive and dynamic, I would like to talk about some key challenges to human rights in Asia and what are the solutions, what is the way forward. I will touch upon 4 key issues. I will briefly talk about what are human rights and why do they matter. Then I will talk about the relevance of Asia and is Asia unique when it comes to human rights. And then I will move on to highlighting some key challenges in the field of human rights. Now, these challenges will not be an exhaustive list, but that will give you a good flavor of a range of issues. And I will conclude by highlighting the way forward where we should be going. As I proceed, feel free to ask me questions at any point of time. So just raise your hand and I can see you and I'll be happy to entertain questions at any point of time. Or if something is not clear, please feel free to do that. All right, so let us start with the idea of human rights. Now there are a number of possibilities or the foundations of human rights. But I think what is most critical element of human rights is that they are for all human beings. And the idea of human dignity is very central to the idea of human rights. Now, people have articulated that we can trace the origin of human rights to natural law. We can trace them to different religions. But I think a secular way, which is universally applicable all over the world, is the idea of human dignity. And of course, even non-humans like animals have this dignity. And that is why even animals' rights are being articulated in terms of human rights. So I think that is the starting point that we should be aware. Now, we have these human rights simply because we are human beings. They are not given by the governments. They're not given to us by the United Nations. We have them simply because we are human beings. And I think this idea is very central to human rights because then the government cannot take it away. So no government can take these human rights away. No private company can take these away. Of course, human rights are not absolute and some restrictions can be imposed on human rights, but these restrictions have to be reasonable. At the same time, human rights have been codified at the international level, especially after the Second World War, in a number of documents or instruments. The starting point was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, but then it was later on what we call ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and then we have the IESCR, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So those two covenants started codifying and documenting, elaborating what these human rights are. And subsequently, other international conventions were developed at the international level. They also dealt with rights of, let us say, children, in particular, rights of women, Now we have rights of indigenous peoples, migrant workers, so on and so forth. We also have human rights or fundamental rights, or sometimes they are called constitutional rights, also elaborated and outlined in the constitutions of different countries. So you will not find normally a country which does not say that we do not have those rights. So normally constitution will have those rights. So at least on paper, you will have these rights documented at the constitutional level, in the domestic level, and you have those rights outlined at the international level in these conventions. Now, human rights are universal. They are applicable everywhere to everyone. They cannot be given or taken away. They are indivisible. When we say indivisible, that basically means that you cannot just give one right, let's say right to life, but then say you cannot speak. Because what life you will have if you do not have the freedom to speak? You cannot give the freedom to speak as a right, but say that you will not have privacy. Or you cannot give freedom and privacy, but say that you cannot practice your religion. Or if you do not have housing, you do not have a decent place to live, or you don't have food, then how can you speak if you don't have food? So I hope you understand. So these rights are indivisible. They cannot be divided. It is a package. It is a basket. So all the rights are important and they are interdependent. They're linked with each other. And if you get one right, that will promote other rights as well. There is this dynamic interrelationship between these rights. So I hope that is clear. That is the basic understanding of human rights. I don't know if you have any questions, but I hope that idea is clear. Then why do human rights matter? Again, a number of arguments have been made. Why do they matter? But I think I will highlight 4 elements for your consideration. The first element is that human rights reflect common good. Common good is something which is good not for one person, but for the whole society. So human rights are core values which are good for each and every society, each and every country in the world. So there is a global agreement, at least on paper. Now, of course, in practice, many countries may not respect all those rights. So there is always a gap between paper and practice. But on paper, there is always an agreement, there's a consensus that these rights are common good, they're relevant. The second point is that human rights are becoming a universal currency. What do I mean by this? Earlier, there was a debate about Asian values because we're talking about human rights in Asia. So there was a debate that Asia is unique, we have some Asian values, and because of those Asian values, our understanding of human rights is different. And many countries, in particular countries like Malaysia, Singapore, and China, led this Asian values debate. But at this point of time, I think that debate has really been taken over with this idea that universality of human rights is very critical. And of course, countries are different, but every country now says that human rights are there. Even a country which violates human rights tries to justify its conduct with reference to human rights. I'll give an example of China here. Now, as you know, no country is perfect, but I will give China as an example that there's a lot of issues about human rights violations in China. Now, Chinese government does not say that we don't respect human rights. They say we are respecting human rights, but we are respecting it based on the local conditions. We have our own characteristics and situations like this. So they also justify their behavior in relation to human rights. The third element or the third value of human rights is that they are also useful for the accountability of different centers of power. And these centers of power could be governments, or as I will mention later on today, they could also be the private companies. So you can use human rights to hold governments accountable as well as the private sector accountable. Now, the fourth and the final point is that human rights provide us a ladder for empowerment. All of us have some basic needs, and we can use the human rights to fulfill those basic needs. We can make demands to the government, we can make demands to private companies as well, because we can say you have to treat us equally. We cannot be discriminated simply because we have a particular religion, or we are from a particular caste, or we are from a rural background, right? Or we have a particular race or ethnicity. That particular element is quite relevant. At the same time, human rights allow us to develop. Now, you are coming from different countries, you're studying in South Korea. This is the idea of human rights. You're able to travel, you're able to study, and you can decide what is good for you professionally. Now, if there are no human rights, you will not be able to do what you're doing now, because your government will not even allow you to travel outside. And if you don't get the education, then you cannot decide what is good for you professionally. So I think that is the idea of human rights. That's why they are relevant and they are critical. At the same time, I would like to mention that human rights should not be seen as panacea. They cannot deliver everything. They have limitations. And sometimes human rights can also be misused. Some countries, let us say US, for instance, United States, they may selectively use the language of human rights to attack other countries. I'm sure you will recall the war in Iraq, for instance. So sometimes some countries may use the language of human rights to interfere in other countries and do even violent acts and aggression. So sometimes those elements of human rights could be problematic. So we should understand that human rights are very important universal values, but at the same time, there are some elements of human rights which may be problematic, and I think we should be aware of it. Now, is Asia unique? The second issue that I would like to cover today is Asia unique? And in my view, there are some characteristics in Asia that are, I think, unique. And those characteristics have some relevance to the discussion about human rights. Let us start with population. Now, as you know, Asia has 60% of the world population. But if you look at the land area, it is only 30%. That makes Asia a very dense continent. There are so many people, but the area and resources may not be enough for Asia because we are dealing with a huge population. And if the population is big, it becomes more difficult for the government to realize the rights of larger number of individuals. So I think that issue have to be kept in mind. Then Asia is very diverse in terms of culture, religion, cuisine, language, climate. Very, very different. So there are different issues in different parts of the world. And Asia is also home to some of the most notable and prominent religions, whether it is Islam, Hindu, Christianity, Buddhism, or other religions. All of them have origin in Asia, right? So that also brings issues in terms of human rights, because different religions may have a different position about human rights. For instance, in the Hindu religion, the idea of untouchability is highly problematic. In Muslim religion, if women do not get equal status, that could be problematic, right? So I think we have to understand those differences in religions, and they could have an implication for human rights. Now, Asia is also home to oldest civilizations, whether this is Chinese civilization or Indus Valley civilization. And of course, as you know, Asia is also home to largest democracy in the world, that is India. And I would say largest non-democracy, which is China. So that also brings new dynamic, because a huge number of people are living in these countries, more than 1/3. And I think that is something we have to keep in mind. Now, many countries in Asia are in the stage of development. They are developing countries. Of course, we have countries like Japan and South Korea as well, who are not developing countries. But if you look at the large number of countries in Asia, they are developing countries. And that brings unique challenges in terms of that. Now, the two more aspects I would like to highlight about the uniqueness of Asia, that is about the focus on duties. Now, whenever we talk about human rights, others have duties. So let us say if you have a human right to life, then duty is on others to ensure that your right to life is protected. But in Asian societies, there's a lot of focus on duties, what you should do for society, what you should do for your country. So they don't focus merely on rights, they focus on duties. And sometimes they link duties and rights and say, oh, you must follow your duties first and then talk about the rights. I think that also brings a unique challenge. And my final point is, unlike Africa, Europe, or the Americas, in Asia, we do not have any regional human rights charter. In Europe, we have European Convention on Human Rights, and there is always a court or commission in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, or in Northern America to deal with those issues of human rights at the regional level. But there's nothing in Asia. And perhaps it is difficult to agree on something in Asia because Asia is so diverse. It goes from Middle East to the East Asia, and those particular different countries at different stages of development, different political views. I think Becky has a question. Becky, you go ahead.
So, since Asia is very diverse, so we know that it is full of cultures and religions, and sometimes we can see that if the human rights that being proposed is opposed to the cultures and religions, which which one should we focus on? Is it to on the culture and religions, or is it to the freedom of the human rights that being fight for?
It's a very good question, Becky. My opinion is, my view is that culture, religion should change with the time. And human rights are core values. And if there is a conflict, human rights should prevail in those particular situations. Let us say if there is a particular culture which says that women should not go for higher education, or women should not work after marriage, and they try to justify it because of culture or religious practices. In my view, this is not a good idea, because this is inconsistent with the idea of equality and human dignity. If women on their own free choice do not want to work, that is fine. But they should have this freedom to decide what is good for them. So in my view, if there is a conflict between religion and culture on the one hand, and human rights on the other hand, human rights should prevail, and culture and religious practices should evolve as per the time. We have already seen many changes in religion and culture, and I think they should be adaptable, they should be flexible to meet the need of other time, modern time.
As Becky mentioned, that due to some circumstances, we have to compromise on a lot of human rights. So I have a question regarding childbirth control, especially regarding China. Because of overpopulation, they decided to have childbirth control in China. So what do you think of this childbirth control in the perspective of human rights?
Again, very, very good questions. I'm very excited that you're asking these very good questions and different set of questions. So as you know, China used to have one child policy for many years. Now they have abolished this policy, perhaps because of the aging population. So now people are allowed to have up to 2 kids. In my view, the governments can justify policies to control or regulate birth control for a larger public interest. At the same time, whatever they are proposing, it should be reasonable and proportional. So in my view, a policy which said that you could only have one child was not consistent with the idea of human rights in my view. It was problematic. So there should be more flexibility. Of course, you can raise awareness and enhance education and encourage couples to have less children. That is fine. But if you provide for punishment, if you exceed it, that is the inconsistent idea of human rights. I will give you a reverse example also. In some countries, let us say countries like Japan, Singapore, or some countries in Europe, perhaps even South Korea, the government do some incentives for people to have more kids. So you have a country like China, which is discouraging and punishing. And you have other countries who are encouraging. So someone may say, why should the government encourage couples to have more kids when we have a huge amount of population in the world? And I would argue that even that is problematic. Because if you have an aging population, perhaps migration may be a better way to go about it. There are so many people there in other parts of the world. You allow migration rather than encouraging to have more kids, right? I mean, this is my view, but of course, when it comes to human rights, there are different views. So you should not think that my views are the views or the only views which are there. No, I really enjoyed interacting with these students. There's a small number of students, I think only 6 from 3 different countries. But the type of questions they asked me, that was a very good experience for me, because they asked critical questions, sharp questions, and covering different aspects. And I very much hope that the programs like this will continue. And more importantly, when these 6 students go back to their countries or wherever they are in the world, it does not matter. It's a globalized world. Wherever they are and whatever they do in life, I hope they can carry on these important human rights values in their work and also influence others.